And as we know, all good things must come to an end. We reach our final video, given that his battle versus Wesley So was round 9 from the Altibox Norway Chess Super Tournament, the Blitz Tournament. Here Magnus Carlsen took the black pieces against Wesley So. Started out with a slightly unorthodox move order, but immediately transposed into a Dutch. The same opening that he actually played against Sergei Karyakin. Now with d5, the stonewall has been reached. But after c4 and bishop b6, we know this is not going to be exactly like the game with Sergei Karyakin because the white knight is on f3 rather than on h3. c6 is played, bishop to f4, and the capture has us continuing down roads traveled often. This is theory. If you're wondering why white can justify not only the knight on f3, but the doubled pawns that go with it, that is because the extra control that it gives white over the center dark squares is crucial. And very often, after e3 and knight bd7 has been played, you're going to see white develop aggressively early with the intention to not necessarily put this king over here, given that the g-file has been exposed. Wesley played the move queen to b3, which immediately puts indirect pressure on this diagonal, including the king on g8, and also causes some dysfunction to black's development, so Magnus plays b6. The issue is that after knight to g5, Magnus has some things to figure out. He needs to guard the e6 pawn, but he also has to be worried about tactics here, where white might just capture everything and blow open the diagonal. Rather than allow those tactical opportunities to continue, something like rook to e8 might even allow things to blow open, Magnus decides to play the simple move, knight to b8. This move defends e6 indirectly with the bishop, but also opens up the queen, so now black has control and protection over both of these squares. But Wesley isn't done. He castles long, and this is actually a strong move. I think white is better here, and white has the potentially better attacking chances. Magnus is a little nervous. He plays king to h8. Wesley returns the favor with a waiting move with the king. And after queen to e7, we already have our first critical moment. In the game, you're going to see that Wesley played the move rook to c1, which is a good full board, balanced approach. I think in hindsight, analysis shows that maybe he could have been more aggressive with a move like h4. The threats are clear. He wants to play things like h5 and h6, and let's go for checkmate. But just to show a line, if black plays h6 himself, not only could Wesley play moves like bishop f3 and try to bring the queen around because this knight is kind of poisoned, but you can also see variations where the knight just comes back to f3, and suddenly the pawn on h6 wishes it could go back in order to guard this g6 square when you see ideas like knight to e5 about to come in. So, again, Wesley didn't play that. He played the move rook to c1, and as we said, was taking more of a full board approach. Magnus took his time thinking, allowing us that time for analysis, because he knew we were going to do this video, and then he finally played h6, as you just saw him do. Wesley still could have played a move like h4 here and tried to call Magnus's bluff, but he decides to immediately retreat the knight, which makes sense. Again, if he can get the knight in there, you may see tactics that start occurring. But after knight b to d7, we're going to get a trade if that happens. Wesley traded on d5, Magnus took on d5, and Wesley went into a think before playing the move knight e5, as you just saw, and Magnus immediately trading. To talk about the think Wesley just went into, I think it was justified because I don't think knight e5 was the best move. I think knight to b5, opening up the c-file and keeping the tension in the position, given that this e5 square remains available, given that there's threats like rook into c7. This is tough for black. To show you an example line I looked at, if a6, knight to c7, rook a7 is played, white can even be as aggressive as a move like rook to c6, attacking e6, attacking b6, and moves like knight to b8 to open up the door, walk into tactics like knight e5. Suddenly, knight to g6 check is a threat. The b6 pawn is hanging. You can check the analysis for yourself, but what did become clear is that after knight e5 and the massive simplification here that happened, Wesley So probably regretted being so directly aggressive, as now black plays bishop a6 in the game. Wesley tried to trade off things in order to keep the equality, with that bishop on a6 being such a dangerous piece, threatening things like bishop d3. But despite the trades and the eventual trade and simplification on the c-file, Magnus was doing well. And probably in hindsight, again, Wesley would have thought that maybe in this position, instead of playing the move knight to e2, where he could have maybe kept this f4 square open, he might regret the fact that he played f4 so quickly, allowing black to trade on c3, as we see Magnus do. Again, I think knight e2 was probably white's last chance to maintain the balance. But he played f4. Magnus calculated, took on c3, traded, and immediately brought the queen to h4. And suddenly you see white's pawns are weaker than black's. Wesley plays one, believe it or not, already nearly critical blunder with the move queen a3, misplacing the queen and allowing Magnus to grab control over the c-file. Suddenly, things are getting very dangerous. He takes a7 and Magnus takes h2, and Wesley realizes queen to c2 check followed by queen c1 mate is an issue. a3 seems to do the job of protecting this idea, but after the very, very strong queen to g2 that we just saw Magnus play, you see rook d1 is not possible because of queen c2, rook to c1 is not possible because of the trade, which means the only move is rook e1, and now Magnus just continues to play the two-step, plays queen f2 with tempo still, rook d1 not possible because of queen check, rook c1 not possible because of trades, and takes here with check. And that means if we have to run to h1, well then black just gained two tempos along the way to gobbling up not just the e3 pawn, but eventually the d4 pawn, as you see Magnus grab now. So suddenly it becomes clear that So's position is far from desirable. Queen to d7 makes sense, it's a fork, but Magnus can protect both of them with a check and tempo. The king goes to a1, and Magnus has sort of a pleasant choice here. He probably could have even brought the queen back to c6 and been much better in the ensuing rook ending, but calculates that d4 opening the queen to guard the pawn while she still guards the rook was good enough. And that's because rook to g1 threatening checkmate can be met by rook to g8, and rook to d1 can be met, as we're about to see the players play. Sorry, I got a little bit ahead of that in the analysis. Rook to d1 can be met by the move d3, sacrificing the d3 pawn for the f4 pawn, which proves to be a more critical pawn as it provides protection for e5. Wesley takes it, Magnus gobbles up f4, and you start to see that white may be headed toward a position where black actually has 4 passed pawns on the king's side as soon as he can eliminate e5. Queen to d6 is played, we get a check, we get another check, and now the f4 pawn is going to join the attack as the players, I believe that's Maxime Vachier-Lagrave looking over, and maybe even Aronian, began to gather around and watch Magnus do his thing as he was nearing his way toward a victory at the Norway Blitz Super Tournament. Rook to c3, the queen goes to d5, as we're about to see, offering the queen trade and still putting the question to So how he intends to deal with so many passed pawns over here on the king's side. Wesley realizes his best chance is to go for counterplay, so he gobbles up the b6 pawn. After queen takes e5, though, his best efforts to try to stay in the game of the race that begin with the move pawn a4 run into serious issues as soon as black points out that his pawns are faster. Rook to f8, the rook goes behind the pawn, and we know what's coming next. We have threats here. And queen to b4, king to g8, rook to f3. Magnus is going to play queen to f5, which is a nice move because not only does it keep the battery, the protection of the f4 pawn, but it opens up the new pawn to get into the storm. Wesley is running out of ideas. Queen to c4 pins the pawn, but after a simple move, king h7, So realizes that 4 pawns versus 2 pawns is slightly favorable for black, and the inability to stop threats like e5 and e4 are probably enough to throw in the towel. Wesley takes a little bit of time here before agreeing to this result and offering Magnus exactly what he got there, which of course was a clear first victory at the Altibox Norway Chess Super Tournament, the Blitz Tournament. Magnus did get first, and as we see, the final standings showed Hikaru Nakamura there, a full 2 points behind Magnus Carlsen, tied with Levon Aronian for second and third place, showing you the world champion's dominance in Blitz in on his home turf. Exciting stuff. We hope you enjoyed this series. We appreciate you following it from start to finish. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel here. Congratulations to Magnus for a dominant performance, and thanks to Peter Dockers and the Chess.com team on site for bringing us these videos and opportunity to bring you the analysis that we did here.